Hey everyone, it's Julie Caraccio. Welcome to Reawaken Your Brilliance on Google Hangouts on Air. I'm super excited today. We are going to be talking about matrix birth reimprinting. This is something that I know very little about. A friend of mine in my Intuitive Mothers group said you need to have this woman on your show, and so I said absolutely. And so I want to tell you about Sharon King right now, and then we're going to get started with the interview. Sharon King developed the matrix birth reimprinting protocols, which became a foundational cornerstone in a self-help technique called matrix reimprinting. Sharon leads the field in this area, and her techniques are published in the book Matrix Reimprinting Using EFT, which was released by publishing giants Hay House in August 2010. Sharon is both intuitive and compassionate, meaning that she can help people to shine a light on where their blocks are and sensitively transform them with a mixture of emotional work and energy work. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you, Julie. I'm so delighted to be here.
And we're thrilled to have you. Now, I'm wondering if you can first explain what matrix reimprinting is, and then we'll go to what you've created with birth reimprinting.
Okay, so I will tell you a little bit about matrix reimprinting, but first of all, we need to rewind a little bit and go to EFT first.
Okay.
EFT is emotional freedom technique, quite often referred to as tapping. So I'm not sure whether you've heard of EFT, Julie, but
I have, and I've done it before, and I think it's phenomenal.
Brilliant. Okay, so it's an energy psychology technique, and it's a beautiful way. You use the tapping on certain meridian points, which helps to shift stuck energy. So when we have a stuck emotion about something, when we have a belief about something, then that all kind of gets stuck in our energy field, and everything that happens in our past kind of goes up to make the person that we are today. But not only the events that happen, I also believe that 95% of our thoughts, feelings and emotions don't actually belong to us.
Oh.
But
that's key. Wow, okay, that's the first time I've heard that. Okay.
Okay. So we'll get more onto that a little bit later, but we'll just start off with a simple explanation. So EFT is a fabulous tool for moving stuck energy. And Carl Dawson, who was an EFT master trainer, he developed the matrix reimprinting. So he was working with somebody and they were tapping on a specific event that happened in this woman's life when she was 4 years old. And no matter how much tapping they did, she couldn't release the energy of what was going on. We number it like 0 is no emotion on something and 10 is like very emotional, and her energy, her levels weren't coming down. So he said to this woman, what's going on? And she said, well, I can see myself so clearly. I can see my little 4-year-old self so clearly. I could tap on her. So he said, brilliant, tap on her. So if you were to imagine that event that happens, something that's a little bit traumatic, we believe that it gets held in the matrix or the field. Okay? So that part of our consciousness splits off at that time when a trauma occurs. So, you know when you've had a traumatic event, because the first thing you do is go, yeah? And that's the freeze response. So that gets held in time. So what you do is you imagine stepping into the picture and working with your younger self.
That makes so much sense when you think about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's so amazing because when you start working with these younger selves, they are so real. They talk back to you. They tell you what's going on. They tell you how they are feeling, and they tell you about the belief that they made. Now the interesting thing is the word belief is actually made up of the word lie. So our perception of the world isn't always necessarily the truth.
Right, right.
So what we do is we go back and we find those traumatic events, those events where we made beliefs about ourselves. And if you can imagine, like, the event that happened, it was on a play, it was on a stage, okay, and you've got the actors, which put your mum and dad and your younger self there. You actually step on the stage as adult you, and you start interacting with your mum, with your dad, and your little self.
Okay, wow, that's amazing. I'd never heard of this until someone recommended you. So that's a fantastic explanation. So then you've taken it a step further, and I would like to concentrate mainly on birth reimprinting, because until I went to your website, I thought, wow, birth trauma, that's something I am fascinated with, because a little later I'll share something personal, and I am curious to how you see it related. So you trained in this, and then how did you develop the birth component?
Okay, well, that came about during one of Carl's workshops. He asked me to work with a lady called Caroline, who was 5 months pregnant with her third child. And she was terrified. She was in a lot of fear, a lot of panic about giving birth to her third child. And the reason for this is that she'd previously given birth to 2 boys. Both their births were identical. They were both very long. She had medical interventions. The labours were very painful for her, and she had trouble breastfeeding after the labour. And she so wanted a natural birth that was undisturbed by the medical profession. And she wanted to be able to breastfeed easily, but she was told after birth number 1 that, don't worry, birth number 2 will be absolutely fine, no 2 births are the same. But unfortunately, in her case, both births were absolutely identical.
Okay.
So I worked with her on that fear of giving birth to her third child, and we actually went back into the matrix and we worked on her younger self for the birth of her first child. We then went back and worked on her own birth. And what was really interesting, when she went back to her own birth, she found that her mum was in fear, in a lot of pain, the same that she was. But not only did we work on her mum to release that, but we also worked on her baby self in the womb, who was also picking up on mum's fear.
Okay, because well, I was going to bring up at some point, I've recently discovered, we're starting a family, that I have this fear of the birth process, and it, for me, I felt came out of nowhere, because I was watching, I walked in, my husband had something, and it was a woman in labor in the hospital, and I just got all panicky, and I was like, oh my gosh, and so I thought, that's really weird, because I'd never felt that before, but I believe it had been affecting conception and all of that, and so I'd wondered, and this might be a little too woo-woo, but perhaps in a past life, because I personally believe in past lives, that I had died in childbirth. But then when this was before I had contacted you, and I thought, well, maybe it's something like this, like, and now you're saying this woman's mother had fear, so I'm like, oh, well, maybe that's something that could have been passed on to me that I just wasn't aware of.
Absolutely, it could come from your own birth. So, what do you consciously know about your birth, Julie?
I know very little. The only thing, my mother, either 3 of us in our family, 3 years, my older brother's 3 years, and I have one that's 8 years younger. She always said her pregnancies were easy. She wasn't sick during her pregnancies. I think I would probably say she had ambivalence about having a girl, because I have 2 brothers, but she never, oh, this is interesting, this just popped in. When I was born, my father was graduating, and he wasn't with my mother in the room. One of his close friends was. Luckily, she had someone, but it was my dad, because he was graduating from law school that day and had to be at the ceremony. And that just popped in, but that's the extent of what I know.
Okay, so you were born in hospital?
Yes.
You don't know whether it was an easy birth, a long labour birth, whether there was any medical intervention. Were you a natural birth or a C-section?
Oh, natural.
Okay. Okay, it's interesting, once you start asking questions like that, people actually know a little bit more than what they think they do. So you're a natural birth, born in hospital, and your father wasn't there.
Yes.
So, you know, the chances are it could have been a long labour. You could have, you know, taken a long time to come out. You may have even got a little bit of stuck in the womb. So that could be coming up. All that could be coming up. Right. You could have had the cord wrapped around your neck, for instance, as well. So again, that could be coming up. But absolutely past life, you know, I'm sure, you know, many of us have died in childbirth as well. So it's quite. Now,
is that something, if you were working with someone, like, you would start to ask the questions like you're asking me now, and then you'd be able to hone on into it where it happened?
Absolutely. So, we would discuss a little bit about your birth, and then I'd just ask you just to, just to close your eyes and just tune into your body. Where are you feeling that energy in your body when you think about your own birth? Or even just take you back to what was coming up, however long ago it was when you were thinking about having a child and, everything was coming up. So just you tune into the energy, and I kind of describe it as our bodies are like computers. Our body minds are like massive giant computers, and your conscious mind is like your desktop. Okay, so on your desktop, I mean, I'm looking at mine now, I've got lots of little icons that take me into Word, to Publisher, to Excel, to Skype, all these different, but they're just small icons on my computer. Now, if I double click on one of them, it will open up Word. Okay, so by tuning into your body, you're looking for that icon. Where's that energy being held in your body? So is it in your heart? Is it in your solar plexus? Is it your stomach? Is it around your throat? Wherever that energy is, that's like you start putting your attention on there, and you double click on it, and it opens up into a program. Okay, the program of Julie's birth.
Yes,
and then you go into that program and you start reading all the data that's in there.
Okay. Now, would it make sense that it started to come out now because it was really not an issue before now? And so now it's like, okay, if it really might start to happening, now it's like, woohoo!
Yeah, because before your attention wasn't in that direction, and now it is. Okay, quite often you'll find that women, when they are pregnant, then their own birth experience will come up, and it happens for the fathers too. It either comes up consciously or subconsciously. It could be if the woman's either lost a child previously, or has lost a mother, or has had abuse, some form of sexual abuse. All of that can come up as well while you're pregnant, because it's a very intimate time, and it does tend to focus the mind and open up these different icons, things that you wouldn't normally naturally be thinking about.
Now, this just came to me as you were talking. Have you ever worked with someone who maybe they were a miscarriage or an abortion, or meaning that they had experienced that and then came in another lifetime, but working with them discovered that this was part of their background?
I haven't, Julie. I work with a lot of women that have had miscarriage, abortion, etc. I've worked with a lot of people who's been in the womb and their mother had previously experienced it, so that affects them how they are, because for instance, if a mum's lost a baby, then she's going to be in fear of it happening again, so the energy of fear will be going to the baby, because while the baby's in the womb, the baby's experience of the world is through the mother, so every thought, feeling and emotion that the mother has, the baby's experience, which goes back to what I was saying about 95% of our thoughts, feelings, emotions don't belong to us. Because while we're in the womb, we are conscious beings, but we've also got our subconscious tape recorder downloading all the programs that we need to be able to survive into the world. So again, think about your computer. There is a consciousness there with the baby, and you're able to tap into these events, but most of the things the baby experiences in the womb isn't actually their experience, it's mum's.
What advice would you have for people who are wanting to start a family? Because I'm having all these aha moments with you, and obviously the mother, like, conception's important, and thinking about everything. And I would love your thoughts not only on that, but how the father plays a role. Because even though the baby's not inside the father, I'm assuming that whatever they do, the baby will feel in the womb as well.
Okay, let me give you a really good example. We'll talk about fathers first. So, as I said, while the baby's in the womb, every thought, feeling, emotion that mother has, the baby registers. But the baby's also made up of the component of the egg and the sperm, so it's energetically linked to dad. So there was an experiment where they sent the father to the other side of the world, put him on a machine that was going to give him electric shocks, put the mother and baby on a monitor, and every time the father got the electric shocks, the baby registered.
Wow.
So energetically, the baby is linked to father. So even if the mother doesn't know who father is, and father's just off getting on with his work, getting on with his life, then whatever the father's experiencing affects the baby. But of course, we're not just mother and father led, we're also generational led as well. I mean, another interesting fact is, and I'll try and say this as clearly as I can, as females, while we're in the womb, we actually develop our whole lifetime supply of eggs. Okay, it's not something that we reproduce every few months, it's something that we're born with. So the egg part of you was actually developed inside your grandmother.
Wow.
So there's often a really strong maternal connection going on as well, because that egg part of you was actually developed inside your grandmother.
I have to just share this as you're talking. I know something about my mother's birth. So my grandfather wasn't there for my mother's birth because it was during World War II. He was off fighting, and now luckily her brother Earl was there, so my grandmother did have someone. But it's interesting, in both my mother's birth and my birth, the father wasn't there.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
I don't know if that's a connection with my fear, but I just find that interesting, and I didn't make that connection until hearing you speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So nature's designed it so the baby can actually develop and know what world it's coming into. So that's why the baby's very linked to how mum responds to the world. So if mum's feeling really loving and peaceful, then a lot of the energy goes into developing a very intelligent, safe, peaceful, intuitive baby. But if mum's in a lot of fear of her life, then all the energy is going to go into developing what we call the hindbrain, which is your fight and flight brain. So that kid's going to be able to come out and be of lower intelligence, but it's going to be able to fight. So it's, bodily wise, it's going to be able to lay down muscle a lot easier, and will have a higher adrenaline coursing around its body, so more likely to be sparked off into fights and things like this, because it's learned from mum whilst being in the womb that actually out there is pretty dangerous. So I've got to be able to fight.
Okay, wow, that's phenomenal. So I have started talking to the babies for a while. Just,
Brilliant.
hey, I know you're out there. I'm
Yep.
looking forward to you. I talked to him before I met my husband. I met my husband and we got married pretty quickly and blah, blah, blah. But for someone who is thinking about beginning to get pregnant, what do they need to do to have a healthy conception, and while they're pregnant, maybe some pointers that you might have?
Okay, in an ideal world, what I like to do is to work with couples. If the father's not open to this, then that's fine, but especially with the mother. So before conception, I'd like to work with them to clear their own birth trauma, to clear any miscarriages or loss of children they've had before, if that's any the case. Clear if they've had children already. This is not their first child, to clear any birth experience they've had with the previous child. So a bit like I was doing with Caroline, clearing her first two births. And once we've cleared the energy of it, once we've gone through all the trauma of it, what we do is we go back and we take you through how a natural birth would be, and then we re-imprint that. But for conception-wise, also to help women understand that actually how we're conceived matters as well. So, babies that are conceived in love, whether mum and dad are really in love with each other, that are have the intention of starting a family, that are really in support of each other, then that baby's going to come into the world feeling like every new beginning is easy, it's joyful, it's loving, and they're going to feel supported. So the first time they go off to primary school or nursery school, then they're going to feel that love and support. They're going to feel love and support with their first time at school, with their new job. Every time that new beginning comes along, then it's going to be joyful and easy. So it's really helping parents to understand that actually right from the start, right from the get-go, the baby is consciousness. It's a conscious being. So how the conception matters.
And so, for instance, if it was an unplanned pregnancy, then that would be stressful on the parents, and so the baby would feel that.
Okay, I just lost your sound there for a minute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay.
You're back. Okay, so if it's an unplanned pregnancy, then the baby will, a mother finds out and she's shocked, then the baby will register that shock. Okay, the baby will depending on, you know, how mother's feeling, if mum's, you know, considers a termination or is not sure, you know, that she wants to go ahead with the pregnancy, then there's going to be an aspect of that baby that could feel unwanted, doesn't feel like they're meant to be here. And if what mum needs to do, if that is the case, if anybody's listening here that they are pregnant and that was how it started off for them, then all they need to do is put their hands on their belly, talk to the baby, explain to the baby, look, this isn't personal, because what happens is we take everything really, really personally. I mean, I was so shocked, you know, the more I work with my own younger parts, you know, echoes as we call them, energy, consciousness, holograms, and also working with other people's, we take it so personally. It's like we expect mum and dad to know who we are as a personality, rather than, you know, all mum and dad are thinking about is how their life is going to change, what it means to them, you know, to have a baby in the world, and whether they're going to be able to cope. But we, as babies, we don't feel that. We just take it really, really personally. So to go back and release that emotion, release the shock from the baby, and have mum talk to the baby, just say, look, it's okay. You know, we weren't sure that we could cope, but, you know, we will get through this together, and we love you very much. And get that connection going between mum and baby.
And so if someone, okay, so that's great advice for that, but what thoughts do you have while a woman is pregnant? I mean, I talk to the babies, that's kind of what I do, but what do you have, that or any other suggestions that are really helpful?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, working with a pregnant lady, then again, if I hadn't already done so, I'd clear her birth experience, dad's as well, if dad was open to it, and also, you know, work with the baby in the womb. So get mum to check in, see how baby's doing, and also clear anything else that's going on in mum's life, you know, because it's not all about the baby. There could be other things going on in mum's life, you know, maybe she's not looking forward to leaving work, or, you know, she's had a big row with her mother, or you know, there's 101 other things that can go on in your life while you're pregnant, which can be affecting the baby.
So I'm still fascinated by that my eggs were developed in my grandmother. I think that's just phenomenal. But so when you're working with someone, then would you clear my mother's birth and my grandmother's birth? Do you kind of, because that's part of me, do you kind of go down the line and like clear the ancestral line?
You absolutely, yeah, Julie, you can do, you know, especially that, for instance, with you've said, you know, that your grandfather wasn't there for your mum's birth, and, you know, if there's an ancestral thing to go back and clear, then absolutely, yeah, I quite often work with ancestral stuff too, so.
Okay, wow, I'm sorry, I'm just having all these aha moments, I can hardly contain myself. Now, what are your thoughts, I had a miscarriage, and I know that was, you know, I was able to, it was fairly early on and not get too disappointed, because my personal belief was, well, you know, the energy wasn't right, it wasn't the right time, but it can be really devastating to a woman and, you know, and a man, especially when you really want a family. What advice would you have for someone who suffered a miscarriage?
Absolutely. So, you know, look at all those feelings of grief, of loss, disappointment, you know, whatever's coming up for that person, and work with that and release that. And go back to that time and work with your younger self at that time of, you know, when it happened, because it's not a very pleasant experience. But also, you know, most people will be able to come to that understanding, you know, like you did, that it wasn't the right time. And what I quite often find is that the same soul will come back in later on as well. So the soul of that baby, you know, it could just be that, you know, the body wasn't developed in the right way and was going to have something wrong with it that wasn't part of this soul's journey. It could also be that, you know, there's some learning for the mother about grief, about loss. Yeah, but also learning for the baby too. It's always, whenever these things happen, it's not just all about us or all about the baby. It's always a joint thing. So, you know, sometimes those souls just need to come and touch Earth, be in this density just for a very short period of time before they go off and do whatever else they need to do. So, you know, and sometimes they just come down here and go, oh my God, it's not how I expect it to be. It's a bit too dense down here. I'm not ready for this. And they just go, I'm out of here. And off they go. And then it's like, you know, well, if the soul wants to come back again, then it will come back again in, you know, a different baby's body, if you like. So.
Can you maybe share some stories of clients? Because, again, really until reading your website, I never gave the trauma of birth or gave that a thought as having any influence on my life today, which I'm sure it did. So can you perhaps give a couple examples of things that maybe happened during the birth process that affected people later on that you were able to help them change that?
Okay, I've got a number of stories there. How we're born, how we come into the world really does set up patterns for our lives. It really does make a difference to how we are in the world. So one lovely example is I worked with a lady who, I worked with her on her own birth. Oh no, it wasn't. Okay, not that one. We'll work on another one. Okay, so I worked with this lady who's had a 14-year-old son, and that since he was born, he really didn't want to be held. Okay, so you know, every time she tried to hold him, he screamed. Now he'd had a very, very difficult birth, and they hadn't realised that he'd actually suffered a broken collarbone.
Oh, wow.
So, of course, every time she held him on that side to try and breastfeed, the bones were moving around, and it was extremely painful for him. So the belief that he made was that the world's a painful place. You know, and this also happens, you know, when you think about in hospitals, you get suctioning, you get the injections, you get the eye drops, you know, especially in America, there's a lot of stuff that happens really immediately since the baby's born, that all go up to them making the belief the world's a dangerous place and the world's a painful place. So in order to feed him, she had to prop him up in the corner of the settee. So she'd bottle feed him like that. So what we did is we went back and we worked on the birth, we worked on the pain, because she didn't know for 3 months that he had a broken collarbone. It wasn't picked up. Wow. So of course, can you imagine how guilty she felt when she found out? Mm-hmm. So we had that to work on and release too. So we cleared all of that, took him back through how a natural birth should be, had him in the matrix, in that picture, her breastfeeding her baby, and we re-imprinted the picture. Now, he's 14 years old. And she said what happened that night was that he was out playing football with his mates. He came in, his mum was washing up, and he said to Mum, "Oh, Mum, I've got a really sore back. Would you mind rubbing my back for me?" And she went, "Okay." So he took her rubber gloves off and started rubbing his back for him. And he turned around and threw his arms around her and gave her a really big hug and said, "Thanks, Mum," and then rushed out again, like he had always been hugging his mum. And she just stood there in like floods of tears, as you can imagine, because that was the first time in 14 years that he had wanted physical contact with her without, you know, complaints or get off or, you know, he hugged her. So it was like all of that pain, all of that guilt, everything was healed in that session, and he was able to show up differently because she had let go of all that energy. And we worked on him, the Matrix too. A lot of the energy had been released for him. He was able to show up, and they were able to have a different relationship. Separation from mother at birth is massive. So many people have been separated from mum at birth, you know, and to be able to heal that, because babies make the decision that they're not wanted. You know, that mum wasn't there for me. I'm not wanted. I'm alone, and alone to a baby means death.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, it's a life and death situation to a baby who is left alone because they're only operating from their reptilian brain, their hindbrain. So, you know, they want food, they want nurturing, they need safety. And they don't have the cognitive ability to understand that mum's just gone off to get my bottle, mum's just gone off to get some more diapers. They don't have that ability. So when they're crying for their mum, it can be a life and death situation because they don't know when mum's coming back, and if mum doesn't come back, we die because we're totally helpless.
Right. Okay.
But that's all recorded in our subconscious. That all, you know, builds up with our beliefs. And, you know, if people are listening to this, then, you know, if they're starting to feel uncomfortable, they're starting to register some of this in their body, then, you know, if they just start tapping on their fingers, on the tops of their fingers here, that will start getting the energy moving.
So then what if you're, you know, the baby's crying and you're like, "Hey, honey, I'm just going to get to the bottle." On an intuitive level, they understand that you're not leaving, or it's still just unless you're right there, they have that perception?
If you're talking to your baby, you're still connecting with the baby. It's not so much of a big trauma. But when the big trauma comes is when, for instance, we do the let's leave the baby to cry it out.
Oh, got you. I see. Okay.
Yeah. So the baby then goes, you know, it will cry and it will cry and it will start developing the belief that I'm worthless, that my needs are not being met, I can't be heard, nobody's going to come for me. And eventually they stop crying. But they stop crying because they get tired and they give up. And they will keep asking. They'll keep asking for a certain amount of time. But if you continue with letting them do the trauma crying and letting them cry it out without going back and being with them, then they will, you know, they'll shut down. They'll shut down emotionally. And, you know, a lot of people suffer with depression and things like that because they've shut down who they are.
Wow. I'm just learning so much I can hardly stand it. But this makes me wonder about, and I think the term is co-parenting, but someone said something the other day and I thought, wow, that makes so much sense. You're in your mommy's tummy, you come out, and I wouldn't want to be in a crib. I'd want to sleep with my mom and dad. No, you're shaking your head, that's a bad idea? Or did I cut out again?
A little bit, but I got the gist. Yeah, co-parenting is absolutely, you know, having the baby sleeping in the room with you, even if it's not in the bed, you can still get these little cot beds where the baby's right next to mum.
Oh, okay.
And there are so many reasons why this happened, but on a physical level, then the baby needs to be within the heart, the heart field, the mother's heart field. Now, if anybody wants to go to the HeartMath Institute's website, you'll see that we have this massive heart energy field, and the baby needs to be in that energy field because what the baby's been in the mum's tummy, it's been connected with it's entrained with mum's heartbeat, so mum's heartbeat keeps the baby's heart going. Okay, so, you know, laying the baby on mum's chest straight after birth is absolutely imperative for that. You know, it keeps the baby heart going. And for the first 9 months, the baby needs that regular stimulation from mum's heart or dad's heart or a family member's heart, but ideally mum to begin with, because the baby's heart's not strong enough to keep itself going. So, you know, it's my belief that, you know, sometimes this is why we get cot death. Because the reason why it's called cot death is because the baby's usually alone, and it's usually right out of mum's heart field.
Ah, right.
Baby's hearts are not strong enough to keep going. But if you wear the baby in a sling, for instance, during the day as you're carrying the baby around, co-sleep with the baby in a crib next to you, you know, right next to you, not put them down in a separate room, then you know, all of that helps to really develop a really strong heart. And also that bonding, that connection with mum and that feeling of safety.
Now, do you work with people who've started to work with you, they've cleared you, then the baby comes and like, all right, come on over and clear the baby. Do you do that right after birth or with the newborn?
Well, normally what I do is when I work with pregnant women, we usually do a future birth reimprinting, as I call it. So we take the baby into the future and show the baby how the birth's going to be. Now, every time I've done that, Julie, the births have been joyful, easy, you know, and uncomplicated. They've been uncomplicated births. So there isn't a lot to do. But I do work with a lot of women that have already had a traumatic birth. There's a lady called Leanne that I worked with in Florida she contacted me 3 weeks before she was due her second child. She had had a C-section in her first birth without anaesthetic. She had had an epidural, and the epidural didn't take, and they cut her open anyway to get the baby out. So as you can imagine, she was in a lot of fear. So wow. we did 3 sessions, 3 consecutive days, cleared everything up to the C-section part because there was a bit that happened before that. On the 3rd day, she came on. She actually said to me, you know, I've actually gone into labour. You know, my contractions are starting, the mucus plugs come away, and I was going, oh my God, okay, so we've got to really make this session count. So we cleared the trauma of the C-section and we did a future reimprinting. And she had a very natural VBAC birth, which is vaginal birth after C-section. She had a very natural birth. She had a doula that was there helping her with the birth. She'd educated herself on how a natural birth could be and should be. and she'd got herself a really good obstetrician that was like gunning for her to have a natural birth. So everything was lined up for her. And we used a lot of work with empowerment and visualization after we cleared the trauma. And she said that's what kept her going. She could see that future birth that she had planned in her mind, and she just kept to that. She just like, that's how it's going to be, and that's how it was for her. So, you know, that story can be found on my website on the homepage there. It's Leanne's traumatic birth session, and there's actually a little video clip there of some of the sessions that we were doing.
Oh, so, wow. Can you talk a little bit more, and I know what a doula is, but to talk to people about that and some suggestions for a natural birth, because again, I would think a C-section would be traumatic, but what have you found in your practice that babies prefer?
Okay, so as you brought up C-sections for babies can be very, very traumatic, but you've got the elective C-sections and you've got the emergency C-sections. So both will have different effects on babies. So babies that are born by C-section, especially elective C-sections, they're brought into the world so quickly, and the positive effect of that is they're able to assimilate information really quickly because they have to. They're like, all of a sudden they're in the world. There's no preparation, there's no slow lead up to it. But it can also lead to all sorts of different traumas and beliefs in their life about, you know, needing to be rescued from a situation. For instance, they start something and they can't finish it. So there'll be people who either stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning, absolutely determined to finish something, or they'll start something and fail because they can't complete it, and they need somebody else to come along and help them. So. And your original question.
Oh, no, that's okay. So to doulas and just that, and any natural birth tips that babies prefer.
Okay, natural birth. So a doula is a birth assistant. She's like your birthing partner that isn't as highly trained as a midwife, but she will be there from the start of labour. Well, she gets to know you beforehand, and she'll probably teach you hypnobirthing as well. Really recommend hypnobirthing. She'll be there from the start of labour, and she'll stay with you. You know, there'll be no swapping over of midwives or anything. She'll be there with you. But not only is she supporting you, but she's also supporting the husband, father, partner. She's also there to support them too. Because, you know, fathers have a really hard time during the birth process because, you know, men in general are fixers and doers, and actually in a birth situation they need to just be. They need to just hold the space. They need to be there as support rather than fixers and doers. And Leanne's husband, for instance, I mean, he was there when they did the C-section on her, you know, and he was highly traumatized by what he saw, having his wife being cut open like that. So, of course, you know, the father's experienced that trauma too. But what a baby really wants is for a mum to really be able to tune in, to connect in with the baby, to not be laying on her back, but to be up squatting or sitting on a ball or in a birthing pool, and to be circling her body a lot as well, that movement, and allowing gravity to bring them out. But mum, if she's allowed to really get into that space, you know, because birth is such a natural process, and the baby through its own hormone system guides the speed of the birth. Now, nature's also designed it that if mum goes into fear at any point during the pregnancy, the labour will stop. Because we birth from the same part of the brain, the mammalian part of the brain, that animals do. And nature's designed it. And if a predator discovers an animal in a den giving birth, and they're very vulnerable at that point, that if they can escape, they can get up and escape, and the labour stops, and then as soon as they found a safe place again, the oxytocin hormones gets going and the labour can start again. But as human beings, we don't realise we've gone into fear. We don't realise the labour stopped. So it's also about being in that intimate space. It's like that. Sarah Buckley says that, you know, babies need to be born in the same way that they were created in the first place. So, you know, warm, dark, secluded place. You know, mum and dad kind of making out a little bit. You know, if I'd recommend watching it's called Organic Birth.
Okay.
that DVD, because it talks about how women can actually have orgasms during giving birth. It doesn't need to be this painful process.
Okay.
There's also another interview on my website that people might enjoy by a lady called Laura Shanley, who's had 5 births, all unassisted.
Wow.
Yeah, and she explains how she just gets into the energy, she gets into the natural knowing, and her births weren't just straightforward, you know, baby's out. She had a cord wrapped around one baby's neck, she had a footling breech, you know, but she birthed them all naturally. Her husband, I think, was there for the first 3, and then, you know, she birthed the other 2 totally on her own, or something like that. But if you watch the interview, it's really inspiring, and she's actually written a book called The Unassisted Childbirth. So, you know, all these things are possible. We've created this big fear, we've created a lot of trauma around birth, and it doesn't need to be that way.
Where do you think that started? If you have any thoughts, I mean, and again, like it seems to me it's, you know, like I read about women scheduling C-sections because that's more convenient. It seems that I think we're getting back to the natural childbirth, and it hasn't tipped quite yet, but it's a societal thing, or if it was, you know, people to make money with the drugs and thought, but I just kind of wondered about that. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share.
Well, in the UK, I know that there was a lot more hospital births started happening around about World War II. So that's when man started taking over the birthing process in hospitals. So it was around about that time, and I'm guessing it was the same for you guys in America too. So
interesting. Can you work with this, and maybe you do the matrix re-imprinting and less so the birth, but would this work on animals?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, working the matrix all the time on animals, yeah.
Okay, all right, fascinating. Because I'm thinking about, we have a cat, and bless his heart, he's just really, like, the vacuum cleaner scares him, and, you know, we got him from the shelter at 6 months. So talking with you, I'm like, I wonder what his birth was like, and if this is something, you know, I believe in working with animals as well. So that's wonderful. Have you worked with people who've been adopted? Are there special concerns with them, or doing this work has helped them?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do a lot of work with people that have been adopted. You know, a lot of adopted babies will grow into people who feel unwanted, unworthy, not good enough. One of the lovely stories that really sticks in my mind is a lady contacted me and said that she absolutely loves her adoptive parents, and it feels like they're her real parents, but there's something just not quite there. That connection isn't as strong as it could be. So so she asked me if I would do a session with her and actually birth her to her adoptive mum. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting request. Okay, so I said, yeah, okay, so let's go for it. And we did the session, and I connected her with her adoptive mum, and she was there, could see herself in the belly of her adoptive mum, and took her through the birth process. We'd done some clearing before that, but at the end we went through the birth process, and she was laying in mum's eyes. It's the bonding that's the important thing. So she was doing the eye-to-eye contact with mum, and dad as well. Her adopted dad was there. And we got to a really peaceful place, a really lovely space with that. And I just said to her, I was just thinking, how would it be if we invited your birth mother in and just thanked her for being the vessel that brought you into this world? And she said, yeah, that'd be brilliant. So we brought her birth mother in and thanked her, because she intuitively knew, and she found out when she was working, that her adoptive mum was absolutely designed and meant to be her mother. But because, you know, physically she couldn't give birth, the contract was that this woman would get pregnant, give birth to her, put her up for adoption so she could be with this other lady. That's where she was meant to be. So she honoured and thanked this lady for being the vessel that brought her in. And then she ended up bonding with her. I hadn't expected that at all. So she was bonded with both mothers. And it was just so beautiful. It was just so lovely. And it really did, you know, bring a beautiful conclusion to all that energy. And she felt a lot more connected to her adoptive mum, but also felt like something had shifted and changed about the whole, you know, the whole idea of her adoption. So.
Yeah, wow, that's truly amazing. I have learned so much today. Is there anything else you'd like to share, a question that I haven't answered that you think that's very important for people to know?
It's really important for people to know that at any point they can go back and transform what happened. Because, you know, a lot of people may be triggered and going into, oh my God, I did this, I did that. But also just remember that at that time, when you look back at that time, you were doing the best you could with the knowledge and understanding you had at that time. You know, you really were doing the best. Nobody sets out to be a bad mother, a bad pregnant mother, to have a bad conception. You know, you don't think, I'm going to really mess this child up by being the way I am. You don't think like that. You are doing the best you can. So, you know, any pregnant mothers out there or wanting, you know, to be pregnant, then I would say educate yourself on what is possible, what's the best birth scenarios that are possible, and how can you achieve that. Doing the energetic clearing really does help you to have a really, you know, beautiful, easy, joyful birth. And if it's not beautiful, easy, and joyful, also remember that, because I also talk a lot about life purpose and things like that, that how we come into the world sets up how we're meant to be for the lessons and learnings that we want to have as well. So there is a soul contract. The intuitive information that I get through is the matrix birth reimprinting, and everything else that everybody else is doing collectively towards a more natural birth is that babies in the future don't need to come in with birth traumas, but us and our, you know, current babies, that because there is so much trauma around it, then that's how it's meant to be. But going forward in the future, it doesn't need to be that way. So the more we educate ourselves on birth being a really natural process, but also know that if it wasn't, we can go back and change it. You know, we can go back and release the emotion, the energy, the trauma that happened, transform that into a more positive experience. And that helps us just move forward in life, just feeling a lot lighter. You know, we're not dragging around all this heavy stuff that's running, you know, on our computer in the background. You know, we can defrag our computer and we can, you know, spring clean it and make ourselves feel, or help ourselves to feel more enlightened, lighter, happier, peaceful, loving, connected.
Now, can you work with people, like we're talking on Google Hangouts and you're across the pond? Can you do this via Skype? Do you work with people? I mean, I think you mentioned a client in Florida.
Yeah, I work all the time in Skype. I very rarely have people come one-to-one into my house, but yeah, I'd say 98% of my clients are actually Skype clients. I also teach practitioners as well, and moving forwards I'm going to be running classes for couples. And also I really would love to teach doulas and midwives, teach them what I do, educate them about babies being conscious beings, and that, you know, that there are better ways of doing things than what we're currently doing at the moment.
And then please tell people your website, if you have any upcoming classes, anything else to promote, or anything else that if I've missed with besides the matrix birth reimprinting that you'd like to share.
Okay, so my website is called magicalnewbeginnings.com. I'm also in the process of writing a book called The Book on Birth, The Missing Piece, and that's P-E-A-C-E. Yeah, helping people have a more conscious understanding of how the birthing process can be. So hopefully, I'm hoping that will be out by the end of this year. I don't have any programs other than working with practitioners at the moment, but very soon I hope to have some online programs to be able to work with couples and individuals as well, but in a group setting. So all of that's coming up. So I would say probably August, September time. Then if you're interested, email me, connect in with my newsletter, go to my website, sign up for my newsletter. I don't bombard people with lots of information, only relevant information on what's coming up.
Thank you so much for watching, and I want to thank Sharon for joining us today. Please check out my YouTube channel. Please connect with me on Google+. Please connect with Sharon on Google+, and come back and enjoy another interview. So in the meantime, get out there and reawaken your brilliance. All right, bye now.